the 14th of November, 1965. Ia Drang Valley, Central Highlands of South Vietnam, landing zone, X-ray. 10:48 a.m. As First Lieutenant James Riley wrote in his field notebook, the pen scarcely moved. His hands were still shaking from the gunfire that had started just after the helicopters left. The gun I had in my hands saved my life. But I saw 3 soldiers die today because their guns wouldn't shoot. American soldiers from the 1st Cavalry Division Airmobile had just fought their first big combat against regular North Vietnamese Army forces. It was about 14 miles west of Plamy Camp, through the elephant grass and triple canopy forest. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore's 1st Battalion included 450 men. Helicopters had dropped the 7th Cavalry into a clearing at the base of the Chupong Massif. They got in touch with parts of the North Vietnamese Army's 66th Regiment within minutes of landing. The battle that would last 3 days had begun. The new M16 rifle, which was rushed into manufacture and sent to Vietnam with promises of revolutionary firepower, worked perfectly for some units. For some, it had gone horribly wrong. None of them understood that this event would lead to one of the worst equipment failures in American military history. It would cause soldiers to lose trust in their main weapon, which would cost hundreds of lives before Congress stepped in and forced immediate changes. Not in war planning, but in decisions about jam rates, powder specifications, and chrome plating that put saving money ahead of keeping soldiers alive. The issue didn't start in the jungles of Vietnam. It started in the Pentagon's boardrooms and the factories of American defense companies. Eugene Stoner invented the Armalite AR-15 in the late 1950s. This was the first version of the M16. Stoner was born in 1922. During World War II, he served as a Marine in the South Pacific. After that, he worked as a machinist and design engineer. His new way of designing rifles went against everything we thought we knew about military weapons. The AR-15 was initially shown to the public in May 1957 at Fort Benning, Georgia. This rifle was very light, weighing only 6.37 pounds compared to the M14's 9.2 pounds. It fired a small caliber 5.56 mm cartridge at a very high speed. The cartridge, which was based on the commercial 223 Remington round, drove a 55-grain bullet at a speed of more than 3,000 feet per second. Early testing with Special Forces troops in 1962 showed very good results. The rifle's mild recoil made it possible for soldiers to keep shooting straight even while it was in full automatic mode. Because they could carry so much ammo, soldiers could carry 300 rounds of 7.62 mm ammo for the M14 in the same amount of space as 180 rounds of 7.62 mm ammo. The high-velocity round was perfect for close-quarters jungle fighting in Southeast Asia, since it could do a lot of damage. The Air Force Security Police forces were very happy with the gun and said it worked really well. But there were a lot of decisions that had to be made between those promising early tests and the full-scale deployment that would turn a revolutionary weapon into a death trap. In January 1963, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara decided that the AR-15 was better than the M14 and told the company to stop making M14s. In November 1963, he approved orders for 85,000 XM16E1s, even though Army leaders who still liked the heavier M14 were against them. In March 1964, production started. The choice was based on a number of factors, including cost, the urgent need for weapons that would work well in Vietnam's unique fighting environment, and McNamara's belief that systems analysis and modern technology are better than traditional military thinking. But the gun that McNamara ordered wasn't the one that had done so well in early tests. The bullets were the first thing to change. The AR-15 was created by Eugene Stoner to shoot cartridges filled with IMR-4475, a stick powder made by DuPont. The pressure and cyclic rate of fire of this powder were roughly 800 rounds per minute. The combination was carefully designed to work with the rifle's direct gas impingement system, which sent propellant gases directly back into the bolt carrier to cycle the action. In March 1964, DuPont told the Army that it couldn't make IMR 4475 in large quantities to fulfill the required standards and timetable. The powder worked great in tiny, controlled quantities, making consistent speeds and pressures. However, it was impossible to scale it up to make millions of rounds while keeping the same level of uniformity. To make the extruded stick powder, you had to be very careful with the temperature, humidity, and cutting operations. Even little differences between batches could change the pressures and speeds in the chamber. The Army required millions of rounds right away to send to Vietnam. DuPont couldn't deliver. The Army needed a different option right away. Olin Matt Company came up with WC-846, a ball propellant that is already used in 7.62 mm NATO ammo. The procedure utilized to make ball powder was completely different. The nitroxcellulose was mixed with solvents, shaped into little balls, and then hardened. This method was speedier, more reliable, and more easier to use for mass production. It would take 40 hours to make a batch of WC-846, while it would take 2 weeks to make IMR 4475. More significantly, Olin Matt could make sure that the Army got the huge amounts it needed. Both the Army and Olin Matt knew that WC-846 burned differently than IMR 4475. The bull powder made the peak pressures higher and kept them higher for longer as the bullet went down the barrel. This made the port pressures at the gas port position greater. Because the gas pressure was higher, more propellant gas was sent back via the gas tube into the bolt carrier. This made the action cycling more violent and raised the cyclic rate of firing from about 800 rounds per minute to between 850 and 1,000 rounds per minute. In traditional rifle designs with gas piston systems, this extra fouling went into the gas piston and could be cleaned from outside the action. But the M16 used gas impingement directly. With every shot fired, all of the calcium carbonate residue was blown right back into the bolt carrier, the bolt, and most importantly, the chamber itself. No one did a lot of testing on the M16 with WC-846 ammo before allowing the change, which is quite important. IMR 4475 had already tested and certified the firearm. Instead than seeing the ammo change as a major overhaul of the weapon system, it was seen as a straightforward replacement. Despite the production of millions of rounds of WC-846 ammunition for transport to Vietnam, the Army maintained acceptance tests utilizing residual stocks of IMR 4475 loaded ammunition. The second important choice had to do with chrome plating. The cult engineers who made the gun, including Eugene Stoner, advocated coating the chamber and bore with chrome. This technology was neither novel nor experimental. The usage of chrome plating in artillery barrels dates back to WWI, and it was also prevalent in WW2 aircraft machine guns. Creating a strong, corrosion-resistant coating on the steel surface was achieved by electroplating a thin layer of chromium. Chrome plating would help keep cartridge cases from becoming stuck in the chamber while extracting them and protect them against corrosion in the humid forest climate of Vietnam. Because of their time spent fighting in the Pacific during WW, American forces had considerable experience with tropical corrosion. In the humid Pacific Islands, weapons that worked perfectly in milder conditions rusted quickly. Decades ago, chrome plating had been recognized as the remedy. This suggestion was turned down by the Army. Each gun took more time and money to make because of the chrome coating. Thoroughly cleaning, plating, and inspecting each chamber was required. The process extended the manufacturing timeline by multiple steps. Even more crucially, purists among Army ordnance were concerned that chrome plating may compromise precision. Although testing had never proven this claim for military-grade accuracy standards, several target shooters believed that chrome-plated barrels were less accurate than bare steel. The decision was made to build rifles without chambers that were chrome-plated, even though the manufacturer had warned against it. Although there is no official paperwork that details the actual savings per rifle, the Army justified the expenditure as being exorbitant. According to Army ordnance, rust could be avoided with regular maintenance. Under the extreme weather and intense fighting conditions of Vietnam, this idea would be shown utterly incorrect. The third choice would have the same disastrous effect. The M16 was touted by Colt as requiring significantly less maintenance than the M14. It held true when tested under controlled conditions, with ammo loaded with IMR 475. The weapon was touted as practically self-cleaning in marketing materials and early briefings. The military accepted this assessment at face value and neglected to equip and educate troops adequately for cleaning before their deployment to Vietnam. Many new M16s were sent out to soldiers with the clear message that they didn't need cleaning supplies, maintenance instructions, or anything else to keep them in good working order. They warned many that the weapon may harm themselves if they tried to clean it the wrong way because it was self-cleaning. When coupled with the fouling characteristics of WC-846 powder and the absence of chrome plating in the chamber, this guidance would be fatal. The impending catastrophe was made worse by the fourth adjustment. If the bolt doesn't close on its own, the original AR-15 didn't have a forward assist to force it forward. Eugene Stoner had excluded this functionality on purpose since, according to his logic, the soldier should not push the bolt to close, but rather investigate the cause of the problem. According to Army ordinance, the forward assist was included because soldiers required the capability to put the rifle into battery. This seemingly insignificant alteration would subsequently come to represent the systemic issues. Troops frantically attempting to shut bolts on chambers that have been fouled beyond functionality while using the front assist. In early 1965, the initial M16s reached Vietnam. Special operations, elite groups, airborne forces, and the 1st Cavalry Division were the first to get the issue. Soldiers who were part of these initial deployments had greater training and were very careful with their guns. Therefore, they were able to use up most of the IMR 44475 loaded ammunition that was available. The majority of the reports from these units were favorable. In November 1965, the Ia Drang Valley was entered by Lieutenant Colonel Harold Moore's 1st Unit, the 7th Cavalry, armed with M16s. Moore, a graduate of West Point and a Korean War combat veteran, was in charge of 4 rifle companies with 450 men each. They landed at X-ray landing zone in waves atop 16 UH-1D Huey aircraft. Ample ammunition was to be carried by the men under the orders of Lieutenant Colonel Moore. A number of troops had 300 to 400 rounds on hand. This ammunition capacity was the deciding factor in the intense close-quarters fighting that was characteristic of Ia Drang. The North Vietnamese were unable to conquer the landing zone due to the combined firepower, artillery assistance, and strategic airstrikes of the United States. After the fact, combat veteran Sergeant Ernie Savage recounted what it was like. "I am not out of bullets. The M16 functioned flawlessly even though I was carrying around 30 mags. During the whole conflict, Savage's platoon maintained an essential perimeter position. All M16s performed as expected, but Airang was the model of perfection for that weapon." The Airmobile Division's top personnel were well trained. Compared to regular infantry battalions, they had gotten superior training on the new rifle. They were meticulous with their weapon maintenance. Crucially, the rifles that were originally intended to fire IMR 4475 powder were still being used by a few of them at Irang. The weaponry was fresh, with uncorroded chambers. Early warning indicators of the difficulties that would emerge months later were obscured by the mayhem and success of the engagement. It all started in 1966 when regular infantry battalions with no training were given hundreds of thousands of M16s to use in Vietnam, and those weapons were equipped only with WC-846 ammo. The M16 was reportedly malfunctioning at an alarming rate by the middle of 1966, according to reports coming back from Vietnam. After only a few rounds of firing, soldiers' weapons jammed, prompting them to write heartbreaking letters home. Officers filed official complaints, stating that their men had lost confidence in their primary weapon. Medical evacuation helicopters brought back wounded men who reported their rifles had failed at the moment they needed them most. The failures followed a predictable and deadly pattern. After firing 10 to 20 rounds, especially in full automatic mode, the rifle would fail to extract the spent cartridge case. The sequence of the malfunction became grimly familiar to soldiers throughout Vietnam. The soldier would pull the trigger, the rifle would fire, the action would cycle, the bolt carrier driven backward by gas pressure. The extractor would attempt to pull the spent cartridge case from the chamber, but the case would stick, gripped by the corroded chamber walls and sealed by powder residue. The extractor, a small hook-shaped piece of spring steel, would pull against the rim of the brass case. The soft brass would deform under the pressure. The extractor would tear through the rim, leaving the body of the cartridge wedged firmly in the chamber. The bolt carrier would cycle backward, ejecting only the torn brass rim. A fresh round would be stripped from the magazine and pushed forward by the bolt. But the bolt could not close. The chamber still contained the body of the previous cartridge case. The fresh round would jam against the stuck case. The action would be completely locked. The soldier would pull the trigger and hear only a click. The hammer had fallen on a firing pin that could not reach the primer because the bolt was not fully closed. At this point, the rifle was completely inoperable. No amount of manipulation of the charging handle or forward assist would clear the malfunction. The only way to clear this type of jam was to insert a cleaning rod down the barrel from the muzzle end and punch the stuck case backward out of the chamber. This required removing the magazine, locking the bolt to the rear, inserting a cleaning rod down the 20-in barrel, and forcefully driving the stuck case out through the ejection port. But soldiers had not been issued cleaning rods. The rifle had been described as self-cleaning and requiring minimal maintenance. Cleaning kits, when they existed at all, were typically kept at base camps, not carried on patrol. Even if a soldier had been issued a cleaning rod, performing this clearance procedure under fire was virtually impossible. It required using both hands, taking at least 30 seconds, even for an experienced soldier, and left the soldier completely unable to defend himself. In a firefight where the enemy might be 10 ft away in thick jungle, 30 seconds without a functioning weapon was a death sentence. Marine Corporal John Stevens wrote home in June 1966. Out of 40 rounds I fired, my rifle jammed about 10 times. I pack as many grenades as I can, plus bayonet and K-bar jungle knife, so I will have something to fight with. If you can, please send me a bore rod and a 1 1/4 in paintbrush. I need it. Our rifles are getting a lot of guys killed because they jam so easily. The desperation in such letters reflects a soldier's worst nightmare. Fighting in dense jungle where the enemy could be 5 feet away, where contact happened without warning, where survival depended on immediate, overwhelming firepower, and discovering that your rifle would fire 5 rounds and then become a useless club. October 1966, the commanding officer of 1st Battalion, 2nd Infantry, 1st Infantry Division, filed an official report. The new M16E1 rifles are experiencing malfunctions to the extent that confidence has been degraded. His battalion had lost men in firefights when their rifles failed. Troops were beginning to pick up enemy AK-47 rifles from dead North Vietnamese soldiers, weapons they knew would fire reliably even when covered in mud. The AK-47 became the M16's devastating counterpoint. Designed in the Soviet Union by Mikhail Kalashnikov and adopted in 1947, the AK used a fundamentally different operating system. The AK employed a long-stroke gas piston. When the rifle fired, propellant gas was tapped from the barrel through a gas port. But instead of being channeled back into the bolt carrier as in the M16, the gas drove a long piston that was physically separate from the bolt carrier. The piston pushed the bolt carrier backward. Then the piston returned forward while the bolt carrier continued cycling. This meant propellant gas and fouling never entered the action. All the combustion residue stayed in the gas tube and piston, completely separate from the bolt and chamber. The AK was also built with loose tolerances that allowed it to function when dirty, wet, or corroded. The bolt had significant clearance inside the receiver. Dirt and debris simply fell out through gaps in the design. The magazine was curved and designed to feed reliably even when dented or dirty. Every part of the weapon prioritized reliability over precision. Mikhail Kalashnikov had designed the weapon based on his experience as a Soviet tank commander in World War II. He knew that soldiers in combat conditions could not maintain weapons carefully. He designed a rifle that would work regardless of how badly it was treated. North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fighters maintained their AK-47s poorly, if at all. Weapons were stored in underground caches where they were exposed to water, mud, and humidity for months. They were carried through rivers, dropped in rice paddies, buried when units retreated. Yet the weapons functioned with near-perfect reliability. An AK could be pulled from a muddy stream. The bolt cycled once to clear water from the action, and the weapon would fire. American soldiers began to notice the contrast immediately. "We found a case that had been buried in mud, dropped in rivers, left in the jungle for weeks," wrote Sergeant William Rodriguez. "We picked them up, pulled the bolt back, and they fired. Our M16s jammed if you looked at them wrong." The contrast became a bitter joke among infantry units. The enemy had better rifles than we did. The underground market for captured AK-47s flourished. Officially, carrying enemy weapons was prohibited by regulations. American ammunition was not compatible with the AK, and carrying enemy weapons could lead to friendly fire incidents if a soldier was mistaken for the enemy. Unofficially, many squad leaders allowed or even encouraged their men to carry captured AKs. Some soldiers carried both an M16 and an AK, using the American rifle until it jammed and then switching to the Soviet weapon. A functioning AK was better than a jammed M16. Soldiers understood this, even if Army regulations did not. The first official acknowledgement of the crisis came too slowly. Reports of malfunctions reached General William Westmoreland, commander of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. Westmoreland found himself in an impossible position. He had personally requested 100,000 M16s for Vietnam, praising the rifle as ideal for jungle warfare. He had visited units at Ia Drang shortly after the battle and heard positive reports about the weapon. He believed the rifle was a significant improvement over the M14 for the type of combat American forces faced in Southeast Asia. Yet soldiers under his command were writing home that the M16 was getting them killed. The complaints could not be ignored, but acknowledging the problem meant admitting a massive failure in weapons procurement. In December 1966, the Marine Corps conducted a formal survey of 2nd Battalion, 9th Marines, after a series of engagements where rifle failures had caused casualties. The battalion had been involved in Operation Prairie, heavy fighting in the demilitarized zone near the North Vietnamese border. The survey was devastating. Approximately 80% of troops surveyed reported experiencing stoppages during combat operations. Many reported their rifles jamming after firing fewer than 10 rounds. Several Marines stated they had been wounded or seen fellow Marines killed because rifles failed during contact with the enemy. Some Marines reported firing only 3 or 4 rounds before experiencing complete weapon failure. The survey documented the types of malfunctions. Failure to extract was by far the most common, accounting for 80% of all stoppages. Failure to feed, where a fresh cartridge would not chamber properly, accounted for most of the remainder. Failure to fire, where the firing pin failed to ignite the primer, was relatively rare. The extraction failures followed the pattern that would become grimly familiar. The rifle would fire several rounds, then a cartridge case would stick in the chamber. The extractor would tear through the case rim. The rifle would be completely jammed. The survey included the most damning evidence yet. The I Court Committee investigation later confirmed that one Marine corporal had been killed while running up and down the line of his squad trying to unjam other Marines' rifles with his cleaning rod. He was the only member of his squad who had managed to obtain a cleaning rod, apparently by trading with another unit. During a firefight, multiple Marines in the squad experienced extraction failures simultaneously. The corporal moved from position to position, using his cleaning rod to punch stuck cases out of chambers while under fire. He was shot and killed while clearing a jam from another Marine's rifle. His own rifle, functioning properly, was found next to his body. He had died trying to keep his squad in the fight. By early 1967, the stories were reaching the American public. Soldiers' letters home describing rifle failures began appearing in newspapers. One Marine officer wrote, "Senator Gaylord Nelson, the weapon has failed us at crucial moments. As many as 60% of the rifles failed to operate. I know of at least 2 Marines who died within 10 FT of the enemy with jammed rifles." Another letter from a Marine stated simply, "You know what killed most of us? Our own rifles, the M16. Families who had lost sons in Vietnam demanded to know if inadequate equipment had contributed to their deaths." On March 26, 1967, The Washington Daily News broke a major story about M16 reliability problems featuring interviews with returning soldiers and excerpts from letters sent home from Vietnam. The article created a political firestorm. How could American troops be sent into combat with defective rifles? Why had the problems not been identified and corrected before widespread deployment? Who was responsible for decisions that prioritized cost and production speed over soldier safety? The pressure became impossible for Congress to ignore. On May 3, 1967, Representative L. Mendel Rivers, chairman of the House Committee on Armed Services, established a special subcommittee to investigate the M16 rifle program. Congressman Richard Icard, Democrat of Missouri, was appointed chairman of the subcommittee. He was joined by Representative Speedy O. Long of Louisiana and Representative William G. Bray of Indiana. The I-Court Committee, as it became known, would conduct the most thorough investigation of a weapons procurement program in congressional history. Over the next 5 months, the committee held hearings on May 15th, 16th, and 31st, June 21st, July 25th, 26th, and 27th, and August 8th, 9th, and 22nd. All hearings were conducted at the Rayburn House Office Building in Washington. The committee interviewed hundreds of witnesses, from combat soldiers recently returned from Vietnam to Army generals, from cult engineers to ammunition manufacturers, from Eugene Stoner himself to Pentagon procurement officials. Testimony was given under oath. Documents were subpoenaed. Technical experts were brought in to explain the ballistics and engineering involved. The committee examined every aspect of the M16 program. They reviewed procurement decisions going back to 1963. They analyzed test reports that had been filed and ignored. They studied engineering drawings and manufacturing specifications. They interviewed soldiers who had survived firefights where their rifles failed. They brought in weapons that had been recovered from casualties, rifles found next to dead Americans with stuck cases still in the chambers. The picture that emerged was devastating. Every decision that had transformed the reliable AR-15 into the failing M16 was documented in detail. The switch from IMR 4475 to WC846 powder without adequate testing. The rejection of chrome plating despite manufacturer recommendations. The failure to provide cleaning equipment or training. The misleading claims about the rifle being self-cleaning. The increased cyclic rate that accelerated fouling. The quality control problems at Colt that allowed rifles to be shipped with defective parts. Each failure was documented with technical data, engineering reports, and the testimony of soldiers who had paid the price. The committee discovered that multiple people had raised red flags about these issues before widespread deployment. Colt engineers had protested the ammunition change in writing. Company officials had stated explicitly that they could not guarantee weapon performance with the new powder. Eugene Stoner had recommended chrome plating in his original design specifications and had reiterated this recommendation when the Army began large-scale procurement. Air Force officers who had used the rifle successfully with proper ammunition and maintenance had emphasized the need for cleaning equipment and training. Test reports had shown increased malfunction rates with WC846 ammunition. All of these warnings had been ignored, dismissed, or buried in the urgency to get rifles to Vietnam and the desire to cut costs. The most damning revelation concerned who knew what and when. Army Ordnance had test data showing that WC846 ammunition caused increased malfunction rates. They had reports from Colt stating that the company could not guarantee rifle performance with WC846. They knew that rifles without chrome plating corroded in humid environments. They knew that soldiers were not receiving adequate training or cleaning equipment. Yet deployment had continued month after month while soldiers died because their rifles failed. The testimony of returned combat veterans proved particularly powerful. Marine Corporal Thomas Martinez testified about a firefight where his rifle jammed after the 3rd round. He described using his jammed rifle as a club, suffering a bayonet wound, and watching his fire team leader die while trying to clear his own jammed rifle. Private First Class. David Chen described finding a dead American patrol. All 7 men killed, all 7 M16s jammed, cleaning rods scattered around the bodies where the men had died trying to clear their weapons. The rifle, the ammunition, the maintenance procedures all worked together. Changing the ammunition without extensive testing broke the system. He had recommended chrome plating specifically because he knew the direct gas impingement system would be vulnerable to corrosion without it. He had never claimed the rifle was self-cleaning. That characterization had been invented by marketing departments and repeated by people who did not understand the weapon. Some of it had been predicted. The predictions had been ignored. Representatives from Colt testified that they had raised concerns about the ammunition change. They stated in writing that they could not guarantee rifle performance with WC-846 and that the increased cyclic rate violated Army acceptance standards. The Army had granted waivers allowing the higher cyclic rate. Quality control inspectors testified about finding defects in rifles being shipped to Vietnam. Bolt carriers with improper hardness that would crack under stress. Extractors with weak springs that would fail to pull stuck cases. They had rejected these rifles. The rejections had been overruled in the urgency to meet production quotas. The financial testimony exposed another dimension of the scandal. The decision to use WC-846 had saved money. Ball powder was cheaper and faster to produce than stick powder. Olin Matson had made substantial profits from ammunition contracts. The decision not to chrome plate chambers had saved production costs. While the committee found no evidence of outright corruption or bribery, the cozy relationships between military procurement officers and defense contractors had clearly affected decision-making. Cost considerations and production convenience had outweighed combat effectiveness and soldier safety. By August 1967, the I-Court Committee had assembled an overwhelming case. The M16 failures were not the result of soldier incompetence or inadequate training alone. They were the result of systematic failures in weapons procurement, testing, and deployment. Multiple officials and organizations shared responsibility. Army Ordnance had approved the ammunition change without adequate testing. The Army Material Command had rejected manufacturer recommendations about chrome plating. Training commands had failed to develop proper maintenance instruction. Colt had continued production, despite knowing about problems. Olin Matson had supplied ammunition that did not work properly with the rifle. Pentagon procurement officials had prioritized cost and speed over reliability. The committee's formal report, released on October 19, 1967, contained extensive findings and recommendations. The switch to ball powder ammunition was identified as the primary cause of malfunctions. The lack of chrome plating in the chamber was the secondary cause. The failure to provide adequate cleaning equipment and training was the tertiary cause. The report recommended immediate action. Chrome plate all M16 chambers and bores. Develop improved ammunition with reduced fouling characteristics. Provide extensive cleaning kits to all troops carrying M16s. Implement comprehensive training programs on proper maintenance. Modify the rifle to reduce the cyclic rate. Establish better quality control in production. Create accountability for procurement decisions that affected soldier safety. The investigation generated enough political pressure that the Army could not continue its previous course. Changes began immediately, even before the final report was released. The forward assist was strengthened and improved. While Eugene Stoner had opposed this feature, soldiers in the field found it useful when properly applied. The improved forward assist had a stronger paw and could apply more force to close a reluctant bolt. However, training emphasized that the forward assist was for chambering a round when loading the rifle quietly, not for forcing a jammed action. Most importantly, the designation change came with a complete overhaul of training and maintenance procedures. The self-cleaning myth was explicitly and publicly debunked. Army training commands rewrote all instruction materials. The new doctrine emphasized that the M16 required regular, thorough cleaning, especially in combat conditions. Field Manual 23-9 was completely rewritten with detailed cleaning instructions. The new manual included step-by-step procedures with photographs and diagrams. It specified exactly how to disassemble the rifle, what to clean, how to clean it, and how often. Soldiers were instructed to clean the chamber and bore after every firing session. The gas tube required cleaning weekly in combat conditions. The bolt and bolt carrier needed to be disassembled, cleaned, and lubricated daily when in the field. Comic book-style manuals were produced, showing soldiers exactly how to maintain their rifles. These manuals, with simple illustrations and step-by-step procedures, could be understood even by troops with limited literacy or for whom English was not their primary language. The comic format used clear drawings, showing each step of disassembly and cleaning. Arrows indicated direction of movement. Text was minimal and simple. A soldier who could not read technical prose could follow the illustrated guide. Comprehensive cleaning kits were manufactured and distributed throughout Vietnam. Each kit contained everything needed to maintain the rifle in combat conditions. A 3-piece aluminum cleaning rod that could be screwed together to reach the full length of the barrel. A bore brush with stiff bronze bristles to scrub fouling from the rifling. A chamber brush specifically designed to clean the chamber walls where cases stuck. Pipe cleaners to clean the gas tube without disassembling the rifle. Cotton patches to wipe surfaces clean. A small bottle of lubricating oil. A toothbrush-style brush for cleaning the bolt and bolt carrier. The entire kit fit in a small plastic case that could be carried in a cargo pocket or attached to load-bearing equipment. Soldiers were required to clean their rifles daily in combat conditions, more often if they had fired extensively. Squad leaders inspected weapons regularly. Platoon sergeants conducted detailed inspections before and after operations. A dirty rifle was treated as a serious offense equivalent to other failures of discipline. The message was clear. Your rifle will work if you maintain it. It will fail if you neglect it. New training programs emphasized that the M16 required regular maintenance just like any other mechanical device. The self-cleaning myth was explicitly debunked in training classes. Drill instructors taught proper cleaning procedures and inspected rifles rigorously. Recruits spent hours learning to disassemble, clean, and reassemble their rifles until they could perform the procedure quickly and correctly, even in darkness. Before deploying to Vietnam, soldiers received additional training specifically on maintaining weapons in tropical conditions. Most critically, the ammunition itself was improved. In 1970, a new powder designated WC-844 replaced WC-846 for 5.56mm ammunition. WC-844 had reduced calcium carbonate content, producing significantly less fouling. The combination of chrome plating and cleaner ammunition solved the extraction problem that had killed so many soldiers. The results were dramatic. By late 1967 and early 1968, units equipped with M16 2A1's proper cleaning equipment and adequate training reported substantial improvements in reliability. Malfunction rates dropped to levels comparable to or better than other military rifles. The extraction failures that had plagued the original M16 became rare. Soldiers who had despised and feared the M16 began to trust it. The rifle's inherent advantages could finally be realized without the crippling reliability problems. The lightweight meant soldiers could carry more ammunition or reduce the burden of their combat load. The high-capacity 30-round magazine gave sustained firepower in contact. The controllability in full automatic fire allowed accurate suppressive fire. The devastating terminal ballistics of the high-velocity 5.56-meter round at close range proved highly effective in jungle combat. With chrome-plated chambers, proper cleaning, and improved ammunition, the M16A1 became the weapon it should have been from the beginning. In early 1968, the Army conducted comprehensive surveys of troops in Vietnam. The surveys were designed to measure soldier confidence in the improved rifle and identify any remaining problems. Results showed overwhelming satisfaction. The exact percentages varied depending on how questions were phrased, but approval ranged from 85% to 98% across different surveys. The February 1968 Department of Defense survey provided the most detailed data. 2,100 soldiers and Marines were surveyed about their combat experience with the M16A1. Only 38 individuals, less than 2%, stated they wanted to replace the M16 with a different weapon. The vast majority reported the rifle functioned reliably in combat. Most soldiers reported no significant malfunctions during the previous month of operations. When malfunctions did occur, they were typically minor feeding issues that could be cleared quickly, not the catastrophic extraction failures that had killed men a year earlier. An August to September 1967 survey conducted while improvements were being implemented found that 85% of respondents reported the M16 performed well in combat. 87% said they liked the weapon. A January to February 1968 survey found that 85% of troops wanted either the M16 or the XM177, a carbine version of the M16, for combat operations. The remaining 15% preferred other weapons, but this was considered normal variation. No weapon satisfies all users under all conditions. The transformation was complete. A weapon that had been called a death trap that soldiers had refused to carry, that men had died cursing, had become trusted and effective. The same basic design, when properly implemented with appropriate ammunition, chrome plating, cleaning equipment, and training, proved to be an excellent combat rifle. The human cost of the delay was incalculable. No one knows exactly how many American soldiers died because their M16s jammed during firefights. The number was certainly in the hundreds, possibly more. Each death was preventable. Each resulted from decisions made in offices thousands of miles from Vietnam. Decisions that prioritized production speed and cost savings over soldier survival. Beyond deaths, thousands of soldiers had been wounded while fighting with jammed rifles or using inferior weapons. The psychological cost was equally severe. Soldiers lost faith not just in their rifles, but in the institution that had sent them into combat with defective equipment. The damage extended beyond individual tragedies. The M16 scandal became a symbol of everything wrong with the Vietnam War. Hasty decisions, inadequate testing, prioritization of systems and statistics over human realities, disconnect between leadership and troops in the field. For many Americans, the story of soldiers dying with jammed rifles epitomized the war's larger failures. The story did not end in 1967. The M16A1 served throughout the remainder of the Vietnam War with increasing success. As soldiers learned proper maintenance and the weapons quirks became familiar, the rifle evolved from liability to legend. By the 1970s, veterans who had cursed the early M16s praised the M16A1. The rifle continued to evolve through the M16, A2, A3, A4, and eventually the M4 carbine, serving American forces for over 50 years and equipping armies around the world. The transformation happened because the problems were identified, investigated publicly, and corrected systematically. The legacy of the M16 crisis shaped military procurement for decades. The I-Corps Committee's investigation established precedents for congressional oversight of weapons programs that continue today. Before the M16 scandal, weapons procurement had been largely an internal military matter. Congress appropriated funds but rarely questioned technical decisions about weapons design, testing, or deployment. The military and defense contractors operated with minimal outside scrutiny. The I-Corps investigation changed this fundamentally. The concept of soldier feedback became institutionalized.